Welcome to today's clinic. Today we'll be discussing eye movement and how do you, first we'll talk about how we move our eyes and what is the neurology of eye movement, and then we'll have a few lines about how to examine such a patient. So today is, I think, the 13th clinic in our quarantine clinic series. So we have already covered the basics of neurology cases, how to approach hemiparesis, paraparesis, neuropathy, myopathy, and in the last week we took Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's, and motor neuron disease, and we took one clinical case. This week we'll be taking eye movement, and then we'll be taking approach to higher mental function and cranial nerves. So let's begin. The way to understanding eye movement is you need to sort of go from outside to in. And what I mean by that is that we first need to understand the eyes themselves, and then we need to understand how inside the brain the eye movement is controlled. So first we'll be looking at how the muscular system around the eye will control the eye movement, and then we will discuss how the brain controls those muscles. So let us look at one eye. Let us look at the right eye. Now, in each eye, there are a specific set of movements that are possible. So in the right eye, if this is right and this is left, to the eye, this is lateral and this is medial. So by medial, I mean that the nose is here. So this is the right eye and this is the nose. Now there are certain movements that this eye can do. So what are those movements? The eye can move up, it can move down, it can move medially, it can move laterally. So it can move towards the nose or away from the nose. And there is a rotation movement that is possible. Now imagine that there is one point at the 12 o'clock position. Whether this point moves towards the nose or away from the nose, that would determine if this is a internal rotation or an external rotation, also known as medial rotation or lateral rotation. So if the point at the 12 o'clock position will move towards the nose, it is an internal rotation or a medial rotation. If it goes away from the nose, it is a external rotation or a lateral rotation. And the other movements are self-explanatory. There is a medial deviation, which is when the whole eye moves medially. That is also known as adduction. There is a lateral deviation, so that when the whole eye moves laterally, that is away from the nose, and that is known as, this is lateral, that is known as abduction. And there is also superior movement and inferior movement. Now, if these are the movements possible, then what are the muscles that will cause these movements to happen? So then let's look at extraocular muscles. So again, let's draw the eye. And we are again looking at the right eye. And we're looking at it from the front. So imagine that you're looking at a patient and you're looking at the patient's right eye. So that is this. So there are 6 muscles that you need to remember. First is something called as medial rectus and lateral rectus. So the medial rectus and lateral rectus are the muscles that are responsible for moving the eye medially, that is adduction, and moving the eye laterally, that is abduction. Now there are 4 other muscles. There are 2 more recti muscles and there are 2 oblique muscles. Now the way that these movements happen is that the recti muscles are arranged in front and above and below the medial rectus. So you have the superior rectus here and the inferior rectus here, and the 2 oblique muscles are above and below the lateral rectus, except that here the superior oblique is below and the inferior oblique is above. Okay. Now I want you to forget about the muscles for a second, and I want you to think of these movements. Now, if you think of just the movements possible are adduction and abduction. This is elevation. This is also adduction. And this is internal rotation. This is adduction. This is depression. Now, in each corner of the eye, you have movements like this. Okay. Now, suppose you ignore the muscles. You don't think about the muscles for now. And you just look at all the movements that are possible. This is the overall structure. So you have plain adduction and abduction. And then the 4 corner muscles have this complicated set of actions in which each of these 4 muscles have 3 actions each. And those 3 actions are arranged in this way. So each of those muscles can either pull the eye up or down. It can either pull the eye into it can either pull the eye into an adduction or an abduction, and it can either internally rotate or externally rotate. And the way to remember which muscle does what is this diagram. So here you have medial rectus and lateral rectus, which is easy to remember. And then you add the rest. So here you have your superior rectus and your inferior rectus. So what does that mean? So what will your superior rectus do? Your superior rectus will elevate, it will adduct, and it will internally rotate. Internally rotate, why? Because this arrow is coming here. So that means that if there is a point here, it will rotate in this direction. And that is internal rotation. Now let's take inferior rectus. What will inferior rectus do? It will depress. It will also adduct. And it will externally rotate. Now, why will it externally rotate? Because if the direction of the rotation is here, then that means that over here, if there is a point, that point will get rotated laterally. It will get rotated outside. So that is external rotation. Now, coming to your obliques. Now here you have your superior oblique. Now I'll tell you why superior oblique is below and inferior oblique is up, because your instincts will say that superior oblique should be up. But in this diagram, we have kept superior oblique below so that we can better understand its actions, because the action of superior oblique is that it will depress, it will abduct, and it will, what will this do? What kind of rotation will it do? So it is going to rotate like this, so like this, and like this. So then if there is a point at the 12 o'clock position, there will be internal rotation. And finally, for the inferior oblique, it will elevate, it will also abduct. And here the rotation is like this. So the 12 o'clock position will go laterally. So there is lateral rotation. Okay. So initially, the eye movements can seem complicated. You might have trouble remembering which muscle does what. But whenever you are in doubt, just initially on paper, later on in your mind, just quickly draw this diagram. So if this is your right eye and this is your left eye, draw medial rectus, lateral rectus, superior rectus, inferior oblique, superior oblique. Now, if you draw this on both sides, then it becomes easier for you to figure out the actions, because then you can draw this arrow and then you can just figure out where things go. And it is the same on both sides. Okay. So then you can figure out what action each one does. Now, for the first lecture, actually, this is quite sufficient because this is also a lot to take in. But I'll just put in one more line that every muscle, while it may have 3 actions, out of those 3, it has one primary action. Okay. So in this case, in the case of medial rectus, there is only one action. So that is adduction. Similarly, for lateral rectus, there is only one action, that is abduction. So this much is simple. What about your superior rectus? The main action of superior rectus is elevation. And the main action of your inferior rectus is depression. And coming to your superior oblique, the main action of your superior oblique is internal rotation. And the main action of your inferior oblique is external rotation. All right, so that is the concept of one primary action, and then you have secondary actions. Now, how does the brain control these actions? So again, let's look at the eye, and let's look at the actions. Okay. Now, here we have all these muscles, but there are only 3 nerves that are controlling these muscles. So one of them is 3rd cranial nerve, one of them is the 4th cranial nerve, and one of them is the 6th cranial nerve. And the names of these are oculomotor, trochlear, and abducens. Okay. Now let's start with the 6th cranial nerve first. So the 6th cranial nerve is responsible for only your lateral rectus. So when the 6th cranial nerve acts, so if this is the right 6th cranial nerve, it will only act on the right lateral rectus, and it will cause the eye to abduct. Now coming to the 4th cranial nerve. The 4th cranial nerve is only responsible for your superior oblique. So if your 4th cranial nerve acts, it will act on the only on the superior oblique muscle, and it will cause the eye to follow the actions of the superior oblique, obviously. So it will cause the eye to come down, come out, and internally rotate. And all the rest of the muscles are caused, the action is caused by your third cranial nerve. Okay. So when the third cranial nerve acts, it can do all these actions. So it can elevate the eye, it can do medial rotation, it can do adduction, or it can depress the eye. So there are different fibers inside the third cranial nerve that will act on these different muscles. Now imagine if there is something wrong in your third cranial nerve. So your third cranial nerve is cut off. What would happen? All the muscles that your third cranial nerve is supplying, all of them will stop acting. The only two muscles that will continue acting is your lateral rectus and your superior oblique. And therefore, your eye will have nowhere else to go except follow the action of these two muscles, which is out. So your lateral rectus will pull the eye out, and your superior oblique will pull the eye out and down. Which is why in a third cranial nerve palsy, you get a down and out eye. Okay. Now, from here, you can calculate what would happen if you have your other cranial nerve palsies. So suppose your sixth nerve is gone, then your eye will not be able to act on your lateral rectus. So your abduction will go, and so the eye will be slightly more adducted. So you cannot look outside, you can't look away from your nose. So therefore the eye will come closer to your nose. And if your superior oblique is gone, then what will the eye not be able to do? If your fourth nerve is gone, therefore your superior oblique is gone, your eye will not be able to look down and out. So there are few specific circumstances in which you want to look down and out. For example, when you are climbing down the stairs. So when you're climbing down the stairs, you want to see down and you want to see where your feet are, and you want to see if there are, where is the wall, where is the railing, and you want to see if there are any obstacles around you. So when you're climbing down the stairs, both your eyes are looking down and away. Whereas if you're tying your tie, you are looking down and towards the middle. So if you're climbing down the stairs, you're using your superior obliques. And if you're tying your tie, you're using your inferior rectus. Okay. So that completes our extraocular muscle anatomy. And now I'll discuss how the brain controls these eye movements. Okay. Now, you know that for the brain to control the eye movement, the brain just has to act on these three cranial nerves. So it needs to act on the third, the fourth, and the sixth. And these will act on all those muscles and it will cause the eye movement. Okay. But you have two eyes. So the brain needs to act on both sides cranial nerves. And one of the problems is that supposing you want to look towards the right side, the brain will have to make the right eye look to the right and the left eye look to the right. But the thing is that for the right eye to look to the right, it will need to act on its lateral rectus. And for the left eye to look to the right, it will need to act on its medial rectus. Correct? Is this clear? So this is the nose. The left eye, the medial rectus will act to look towards the right. And for the right eye, you are looking away from the nose. So it is a lateral movement. So it is an abduction. So the simple act of looking towards the right the brain will have to act on right side lateral rectus, that is the right sixth cranial nerve, and the left sided medial rectus, that is the left sided third cranial nerve. And this has to happen spontaneously. It cannot happen that your right eye has gone to the right and then your left eye will move to the right. It needs to happen together. So how does the brain do this? So the entire lecture today of the neuroanatomy of eye movement is basically about how does the brain make both your eyes move at the same time. Because if you think about it, any movement in your body, so suppose you want to move your right hand, suppose you want to lift your right hand, there is no need for your brain to automatically move your left hand at the same time. It has no relation. All it has to do is to make sure that if you are flexing your right arm, it needs to act on the right biceps, and it needs to make sure that your right triceps is relaxing. So that if one muscle is acting, the opposite side is relaxing. And this is called as Sherrington's law. So this is Sherrington's law. So Sherrington's law states that your every muscle has a reciprocal muscle. So a muscle that acts in the opposite direction. So if you are moving one muscle, your opposite muscle has to relax in the same amount. Okay. So it is known as reciprocal inhibition. So in the case of the eye, if your lateral rectus is acting to make your right eye look to the right at the same time, so if it is looking with say X amount of force, then your medial rectus has to be stopped. So the medial rectus should also reduce its action by X amount of force. Therefore, your lateral rectus can move to the right. So that is Sherrington's law. But what we are talking about is something more complicated. So Sherrington's law will apply to every muscle in the body. So reciprocal inhibition, that is Sherrington's law, is a law that applies to all muscles in the body. So it is nothing specific to the eye. But what is specific to the eye is something known as Herrings Law. So what is Herrings Law? Herrings Law states that if your right eye lateral rectus is moving X amount, then your other eye medial rectus also has to move X amount. And these two have to happen at the same time. Because that is the only way that both your eyes can move together as one parallel unit. If those two diverge, then you get a squint. But what you want is both your eyes to be in the same line. So basically, when you look at the eye, the direction of the gaze has to be parallel. So whether you're looking here or you're looking here, that direction has to be parallel. The only time when this parallel rays will split is when you have convergence. So when you're looking at the tip of your nose, then that angle will change. Otherwise, everywhere else that you're looking, both your eyes are moving at the same time in the same way. And this happens because of Herrings Law. And there is a concept in the Herrings Law called yoked muscles. So yoked muscles means there are pairs of muscles that act together. So they are both yoked together in the brain. They are not physically yoked, but they are yoked together through the neural network. So if your lateral rectus has to act, then your medial rectus has to always act. It cannot not act. So it is impossible for you to only make your right eye go to the right without making your left eye also go to the right. Similarly, your left lateral rectus will automatically make your right medial rectus move with it because those two muscles are yoked. Similarly, if your right superior rectus acts to pull your right eye up, it will automatically cause your left superior rectus to also pull it up. You can't make only one eye go up and the other eye go down. If that happens, then there is some pathology. So in a physiological state, you can't make your eyes look in opposite directions. So this is the concept of yoked muscles and Herrings law. Now, how does this happen? Now, there are certain brain areas that you should know about before we get into it. So let's go back to the brain. So after a long time, we've come back to the brain. Thank God. So here is the eye. Okay. Now, we've covered this multiple times, but let's do it again. There are certain lobes in the brain. So you have your parietal lobe, you have your frontal lobe in the blue, parietal lobe in orange, temporal lobe in green, and occipital lobe in pink. And here you have the brainstem. Okay. Now in this situation, the brainstem is also important. So I'm going to color the brainstem as well. I'm going to color it gray. So in the brainstem, you have the midbrain in gray and the pons in brown. Okay. And say this is the medulla. Now let's name all these areas. This is frontal, this is parietal, this is occipital, this is temporal, this is midbrain, this is pons, and this is medulla. And one more very important area is the cerebellum. What color should I give cerebellum? Okay, like this. Okay. Now, why have I drawn all these areas? Because the simple action of you looking towards your right will utilize almost all of these areas, which is why understanding about the neural structures of eye movement is one of the most complicated systems, but it is also the most rewarding, because if you can explain how your eye turns to the right, you have probably understood a large portion of neurology, because almost everything is covered in this one single movement. Almost everything gets covered, which is why this is so important. So I need you to sort of take this in that respect. So you're not just learning about eye movement, you're actually learning all of neurology in this one action of moving your eye to the right. So how does this happen? Now, there are certain areas that you need to know. One is in the frontal lobe, there is something called as frontal eye field. Now, frontal eye field is the area of the brain that will decide. So the frontal eye field will decide to look to the opposite side. So if you want to look to the right, your left frontal eye field will decide that. If you want to look to the left, your right frontal eye field will decide that. Okay, that is simple enough. It just decides, because your frontal lobe is the one that makes all the decisions. Next important area to know is your occipital lobe. Why is that important? Because occipital lobe is where all the vision happens. So if you want to look to the right, you need to see what you're looking at. So occipital lobe is where all that vision is analyzed. Okay. Now coming down, why is your parietal lobe important? Because parietal lobe will give you a sort of like a three-dimensional spatial structure. So your awareness of your surroundings, of where you are, and what is the distance between you and other objects, that awareness happens in the parietal lobe. So without the parietal lobe, you won't really know where you are and where the surroundings are. Okay, so that gives you a sort of three-dimensional awareness. So you need the frontal lobe, you need the parietal lobe, you need the occipital lobe. Temporal lobe is not as important here, except that when you look to the right and when you see something, temporal lobe is important for you to know what that thing is. And temporal lobe might be important if you're looking towards the right after hearing something. So the temporal lobe is where the hearing is. So suppose somebody calls you from the right and your eyes move towards the right, that command will come in through your temporal lobe. Now, coming to your midbrain. Why is the midbrain important? There is something in the midbrain called superior colliculus. Okay, you may have heard of superior colliculus, you may not have heard of superior colliculus. Superior colliculus is the part of the brainstem, it is in the midbrain, that controls your, that is in the pathway of your eye movement. I'll get to how it happens. And finally, in the brainstem, you have all your cranial nerve nuclei. So we already discussed how your cranial nerves of third, fourth, and sixth cranial nerves will control the eye movements. But all these cranial nerves will originate from the brainstem. So the third cranial nerve will originate from the midbrain. Okay. Your fourth cranial nerve will also originate from the midbrain, but a little below. And your sixth cranial nerve will originate from this area in the pons. So your cranial nerves are numbered from 1 to 12, and they're also anatomically from 1 to 12. So they keep going down. So your third cranial nerve is really high up in the midbrain, and then fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh. So it keeps going down anatomically. So this is the rough anatomy of where everything is. Now let's look at a practical example. What happens if, now we will look at it from above. Okay, so we look at the brain from above. Now this is the right side and this is the left side, and this is the eye. Okay, and we're looking at the brain from above. So the brainstem is all below this. So we aren't drawing the brainstem. The brainstem is somewhere below here, and the cerebellum is somewhere here. Okay, but we're not interested in that. We're looking at it from above. And this is the right eye. Now, suppose you see something here in this side. Suppose you see a tiger. Okay. Or a tiger moves into your field of vision. So as you know, you have a field of vision which will extend somewhere like this. So your right eye will have a field of vision like this, and your left eye will have a field of vision like this. And somewhere in the middle, these two fields of vision will overlap. Now, all the images from your right field of vision will enter your right eye, and some of it will enter your left eye. And you may know about the optic nerve and how the optic nerve crosses at the optic chiasma. And all the images from the right field of vision will enter ultimately into your left occipital lobe. So this is the reason why you have a chiasma. This is the reason why there is a crossing, because you want everything in the right side of your field of vision to go into the left side of your brain. Now, I won't get into why that is happening. That is a different discussion altogether. But suffice it to say that this is what happens. So everything in the right side of your field of vision will go to the left occipital lobe. Now, what happens in the left occipital lobe? The left occipital lobe will analyze the image. Okay, so we still don't know that this is a tiger, by the way. It is just a set of photons, it is just a set of light impulses. But the occipital lobe will analyze this image. It will send this image to the temporal lobe. The temporal lobe will compare these images and finally come up with the name tiger. And this will go all the way to your frontal lobe. Okay. So after this image has reached the occipital lobe, it will go to the temporal lobe, and then finally it will go to the frontal lobe. Now, in the frontal lobe, the frontal lobe will now decide that this is important enough for me to turn my eye and look towards it. Because till now your eyes were looking straight ahead. And this is just in your peripheral field of vision. It is just something that just comes into your peripheral field of vision and you may not pay full attention to it. But that image has gone into your occipital lobe and now it has reached your frontal lobe. And now your frontal lobe decides, oh, this is very important for me for my survival. So let me look towards it. So your eyes will turn from straight towards your right. And now both your eyes are looking directly at the tiger. So what has happened is basically that your eyes have moved from straight to the right. And this is how you know whether to look towards the right or not, because there is some image that has come in. Okay. Now your frontal lobe has decided to look to the right and your eyes have looked to the right. How did this happen? So again, let us draw the brain. And now we'll directly start with the right frontal lobe. So your right frontal lobe, this is the frontal eye field. And this has decided. What this does is the right frontal eye field tells the right superior colliculus. Now here, it's better if you look at it from this angle. So your right frontal eye field will tell the right superior colliculus that I want to move my eyes towards the, no, sorry, this is the left frontal eye field. Because you want to move towards the right. So this is the left frontal eye field, and the left frontal eye field will tell the left superior colliculus. So it is still in the same side that I want to look to the right. Okay. Now let's stop with the diagrams and let's just have a flow chart. So this is the right side and this is the left side. This is the frontal eye field of both areas. And both sides have a superior colliculus. And because you want to look to the right, your left frontal eye field has started acting and it has told your left superior colliculus that I want to look to the right. Now, what will the left superior colliculus do? It basically has to do two things. It has to tell the right sixth cranial nerve and your left third cranial nerve. Okay. If you remember, if you want to look to the right, your right lateral rectus and left medial rectus has to act. That means that your right sixth cranial nerve and your left third cranial nerve has to act. The problem is that these are on two opposite sides of the brain, isn't it? So your right cranial nerve is on the right side of the brain and the left cranial nerve is on the left side of the brain. So all this will happen in the brainstem. So this is the brain and this is the brainstem. So again, this is the midbrain and this is the pons. Now we are not drawing the lobes anymore, but just remember that your left, this is the left side and this is the right side. Your left frontal eye field has told your left superior colliculus to act. Now, from here, the command will go all the way down to your right sixth cranial nerve to look towards the right. And from here, there is something called as MLF, okay, which is medial longitudinal fasciculus. And this medial longitudinal fasciculus will carry the command from the right sixth cranial nerve to the left third cranial nerve, which is in the midbrain. That you also need to act on your medial rectus. So that is how both of them move together. Okay. Now I'll take this again because it might be confusing. So first let's draw the eyes. And you want, so this is the right eye and this is the left eye. And you want to look towards the right. So your right sixth cranial nerve and left third cranial nerve. This is in the pons and this is in the midbrain, the origin of these nerves. So this comes from the pons and this comes from the midbrain. Okay, so if this is right and this is left. Fine. Is this clear? I hope that I'm not confusing you too much, but basically for you to look towards the right, these two nuclei have to act and they both have to act together. So the way they act together is from your superior colliculus, the action will come here. Your left superior colliculus, the command will come to your right sixth cranial nerve. And from your right sixth cranial nerve, the command will cross again and go up to your left third cranial nerve. And this is called as MLF. Fine. So there is basically a double crossover. Okay. So what is a double crossover? You want to look to the right, your left frontal eye field will tell your left superior colliculus to tell your right sixth cranial nerve first. So the main take home message is that whichever side you're looking at, that cranial nerve gets stimulated first. So if you want to look towards the right, your right lateral rectus will get stimulated first. Then once your right lateral rectus is stimulated, then the command will go to the other side and then it will go up all the way to the midbrain and then your left medial rectus will act. Now looking at it from the other way, suppose you want to look to the left, your right frontal eye field will give that command. Your right frontal eye field will tell your right superior colliculus. Your right superior colliculus will tell your left sixth cranial nerve. And from your left sixth cranial nerve, it will cross over, go up in the medial longitudinal fasciculus and tell your right medial rectus to go follow the left lateral rectus. I hope that is clear. If it's not, tell me in the chat right now, or if it is clear, tell me that also, because this is the basic concept and this is the only concept you need for now. So, and if you don't know, if you don't understand this one, you can't move ahead. Okay, so this is the crux of the matter, so to speak. Okay, cool. Everybody's got it. Okay, excellent. Now, this is what is known as the final pathway. So for all your eye movements, ultimately, this is where it will end up. Okay. So what does that mean? What does the final pathway mean? that if you want to move your eye, ultimately that command will end up in the superior colliculus, sixth cranial nerve, medial longitudinal fasciculus, third cranial nerve. This is that final pathway. But there are multiple things that will give the command to the superior colliculus. Okay. So what are those? So what we just discussed, you see something and you suddenly move your eye to one side, that is known as a saccade. So a saccade is a sudden, rapid switch of your eye direction. What if you are not suddenly looking at something? What if you're trying to follow someone? So suppose you see a tiger and your eyes will switch, and now your eyes are on the tiger. That keeping your eye on the tiger is known as fixation. Now your eyes are fixed onto that point of interest, whatever it is. And if the tiger moves, your eyes will move with it. So this is called fixation. Now suppose the tiger is moving from the right side of your field all the way to the left side of your field and your eyes are following it. This is called as pursuit. So pursuit is not a sudden movement. Pursuit is your eyes are tracking the movement of something. Okay. So it is very difficult to have pursuit if you are not able to fix, because if you can't fix it, your eyes will keep wobbling. You are not able to fix on one single image. So you can't have pursuit without fixation. And in order to have pursuit, you need to be able to look at it first. So usually there is a saccade, there's a fixation, and then there is pursuit. Okay. So these are different ways in which your eyes are moving, but all of them ultimately, for your eyes to move, your muscles have to act. And for your muscles to act, your nerves have to get stimulated, and your nerves get stimulated from this pathway, the final pathway. This is why this is known as the final pathway. Okay. Now, what are the different things that will control your eye movement? So for a saccade, we already told you how, if you want to look to the right, your frontal eye field will tell it, and that's it. It's over. But what about fixation and pursuit? Because in fixation and pursuit, the point at which you are looking at is not steady. It is continuously moving. So think about that. It is continuously moving in a three-dimensional space. So as soon as I say three-dimensional space, you are bringing in your parietal lobe. Because if you don't have a parietal lobe, you won't have any idea what is space. So you won't know what is left, what is right. So all of that is a part of your parietal lobe. So if you are trying to keep track of something that is moving in space, your parietal lobe will also have a say in that movement. Now, when you are saying movement, you are actually talking of your eye movement. And if you remember, we discussed the role of cerebellum in movement. And we discussed how cerebellum makes all movement smooth. So if there is fixation and there is pursuit, what you're saying is that your eyes are tracking the movement of something. That means that your cerebellum is automatically involved. Whenever there is movement, there is cerebellum. So your cerebellum also has a say in this. Okay. And lastly, suppose your point of interest is moving from one side to the other so much that you have to turn your head. Now that adds another variable, because is your head straight? Are you looking entirely? Is your head only turned to the left or to the right? And if so, by how much? Now this is a very important factor, because if your head is turning, then your eyes will also turn with it. So you need to calculate how much your head is turning versus how much your eye is turning. This information comes in through your vestibular system. So your vestibular system also has a say in this final pathway. So if your eye movement is lost, just imagine the number of places where the problem can be there. So the problem can be in your muscle, the problem can be in the nerves, the problem can be in the nuclei, in the brainstem. The problem can be in the superior colliculus. The problem can be in your frontal eye field, or your parietal lobe, or your cerebellum, or your occipital lobe. So anywhere there is a problem, your eyes will get involved. So if you know the eye movement flowchart properly, then you will be able to diagnose where in the brain the problem is. Okay. So it's 7:55. This is actually all I wanted to talk about, because anything more, if I go deeper into any one of this, if I go deeper into vestibular system or pursuit or anything, then that is another 1 hour of explanation. So I think I just wanted to explain the final pathway to you properly. And I hope that you all understood. And if there are any questions, now you can ask me. And we can, when we discuss cranial nerve examination, I'll talk about how to examine the eyes. So when a patient comes to you with an eye movement disorder, that examination is a part of your cranial nerve examination. So when you are testing for your 3rd, 4th, and 6th cranial nerves, you are going to do eye tests. So at that time, I'll explain how to do your eye examination. Okay. And I'll also be talking about light reflexes at that time, because here I didn't talk about it, but that is also involved in your 3rd cranial nerve palsy. Okay, I think that's about it. Is there any questions, anything you want to ask me? PPRF. Okay. So here, when I said that your superior colliculus controls your opposite side 6th cranial nerve. If you look at the 6th cranial nerve a little bit more closely, your 6th cranial nerve actually has 2 parts. One is the nucleus itself. So 6th cranial nerve nucleus, from where the 6th cranial nerve comes. And right next to it, there is another set of nuclei known as PPRF. And these two function almost as one. The only difference is that the PPRF is responsible for both controlling the right 6th cranial nerve, and PPRF is what releases this information to the opposite side 3rd nerve. So the PPRF will tell the MLF to carry the information to the opposite side 3rd nerve to act on its medial rectus. So the superior colliculus actually tells the PPRF to do that job, and the PPRF will convey the information to both sides. Okay, so yeah, that's the concept of PPRF and 6th cranial nerve. But for all functional purposes, PPRF and 6th cranial nerve act together. So if you want to think about it that way, your left brain will act on your right 6th cranial nerve, and your right 6th cranial nerve will tell your left 3rd cranial nerve. And if you look closely at your right 6th cranial nerve, the 6th cranial nerve is divided into PPRF and the actual 6th cranial nerve nucleus. But they are so close together, they act as one functional unit. So Bhavesh has asked, in the case of right 3rd cranial nerve palsy, the eye would be down and out, but the primary action of superior oblique is internal rotation, wouldn't that play a role? Correct. But what happens is, okay, where is that? It's all the way up. Okay. So what happens is your eye is placed in a central location because of continuous opposite actions. So all your muscles are sort of acting together when you're looking straight ahead, and it is acting just enough to make sure that there is no imbalance. Okay. Now, suppose for some reason all the other actions go away, then even if your superior oblique has a primary role of internal rotation, because all the other actions are no longer there, even the minor actions come into play, and the minor action is down and out. So because there is no opposite pull to sort of cancel it out, that is why even the minor actions come into play. That is why it goes down and out. Chalo, see you guys.